And thank you for joining us today for a very good session that we have planned. My name is Karen Masulo. I'm with Firestorm. I'm our Chief Intelligence Officer. And we have a special guest I'll introduce in just a moment. And we are grateful and thankful to the University of Alabama for underwriting this session. Are you really prepared for an active shooter? This is part of the Firestorm 2017 Crisis Coach webinar series. We always invite you to participate and engage with us on social media. We would love to see you on Twitter. We are at Firestorm Soul. On Facebook, we're Firestorm Solutions. And if you have a question and would like to ask a question on Twitter or on Facebook or on any social media that supports the hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm, as you know, transforms crisis into value. We empower you to manage crisis and risk. And Firestorm expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support during a crisis, crisis communication, crisis public relations, and consequence management. And we crisis risk crisis coach and look forward to working with you in the coming year. A disclaimer, our attorneys always like us to make sure that you understand that this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. And any work product given by Firestorm must be read in conjunction with all guidance given by national, regional, and local authorities, as well as your company's personal counsel. Moreover, the information given and comments made in this webinar should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. Everybody on the call is on mute. If you have a question, you can enter it into the sidebar chat area, and the ever popular Bill Baker, who is on in the background running things, will make sure if we're able to get to that question that we do. If not, we will follow up via email. If you have any other questions, you can always ask us via the GoToWebinar chat function, or you can email us at webinars@firestorm.com. As I mentioned, this session is underwritten and supported by our good friends at the University of Alabama Bama at Work program. This month, we're going to be talking about some great programs they have coming up in a blended learning format that start in October of 2017. You can do in-class and online or on-demand work, and Crimson Lean Six Sigma for your black belt, transactional green belts, Kazon, etc. So if you're a lean person, you want a Six Sigma, this is the place to go. The University of Alabama is offering these programs beginning on October 2nd, and all of the courses are going to be delivered in a blended format with an instructor introduction. There are your courses listed for you, covering manufacturing focus, healthcare, higher ed, and other service sectors. And in addition to the belt offerings, they do have a couple of standalone open entry courses that are designed for foundational learning, so Lean Methods, the Accelerator course, and the Kaizen Leadership course. They have a terrific leaders of their workshops. Diana Rocket is an MBA and a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt herself. And Michael Sullivan is a Six Sigma Black Belt, certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt. And those folks, I'm sorry, did you have a question? I'm sorry, I thought I heard someone have a question. What will be covered in these sessions, you can learn more about on the Bama at Work website. Also, there will be a replay of this session uploaded to our University of Alabama playlist on YouTube, and you can learn more about what we're going to cover today and all of this session information. If you have any questions, you can contact our bestest friend, Brenda Truelove, at the University of Alabama at truelove@ccs.ua.edu, or Derek Flowers at daflowers@ccs.ua.edu. So thank you to the University of Alabama. And now I'd like to introduce you to our guest panelist today, the Executive Vice President of Secure Ed, Marc Connolly. Marc, would you like to say hello to the folks in our session and tell them a little bit about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and it's good to be speaking with everybody this morning regarding this topic. Again, my name is Marc Connolly. I'm currently the Executive Vice President of Secure Education Consultant at the consulting firm made up of former Secret Service agents that work in a lot of different educational environments, houses of worship, manufacturing facilities, to help them develop and sustain solid security programs to help them be able to be as prepared as they possibly could be for a variety of different critical incidents. And we do place a specific focus on this very concerning and real threat of active shooters. Prior to that, I had spent 27 years with the Secret Service. When I retired, I was the Deputy Special Agent in charge of the Presidential Protective Division, and have obviously spent a number of years working on kind of complex and tricky and changing, involving security issues. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning and talk to you a little about how to be as prepared as you possibly can be for this threat of an active shooter.
Well, we really are thrilled to have you, Marc. I've heard your insights before, and you come at it from a very real-world perspective. And I am, oh, I'm sorry, had the wrong slide there. But we're very happy to have you, so I'm looking forward to your comments. I am Karen Masulo. I am our Chief Intel Officer, and I want to talk to you a little bit about why we're doing this session. A short time ago, Jim Satterfield, our CEO, and I were talking, and sadly during our conversation, the news about the shooting at the Fiamma awning company came up. And so we watched and we learned more about that particular workplace violence experience. And Jim was very adamant about wanting to make sure that we address that in a session. And that's also why he wanted Marc on the call, because of Marc's expertise in this area. There is a lot of training out there about what to do about an active shooter, although I believe Marc's approach to it and Secure Ed's approach to it is more understandable. So Marc's going to talk to us a little bit about that. But we also want to make sure that we're there before the incident happens. And Firestorm, as you know, follows a Predict.Plan.Perform methodology. So we want to be there in the predictive stage by identifying behaviors of concern, and in the planning stage and in the performance stage, certainly. But when it comes to the predictive stage, you see a quote there, and it says, "I wish they would have just listened to my concerns." And where do you start when we think about these particular kinds of acts of workplace violence? So first we want to think of, in a simple way, think of the 3 A's. Think of access, awareness, and actions. Then we're going to talk about identifying behaviors of concern before they escalate into this type of situation. We're going to look at the physical site assessment of your facilities, of your businesses, whether you're in a shared tenant corporate office building, or you're in a Quonset hut out in a rural area. We want to look at your particular physical site assessment. We want to look at your emergency plan in case of crisis, and what training has gone on, your active shooter response plan as it stands now, crisis management before, during, and after, and then there are insurance programs now and some really innovative solutions that you can take advantage of. So let's look at that Fiamma workplace shooting in June of 2017. Fiamma is a international company, but has a small U.S. division, and it has multiple locations all over the world. But their U.S. Florida location, I think, had about 34 people at that location. And in June of 2017, A former employee returned to the workplace and killed 4 people, 3 men and a woman, and then a 5th victim died at the hospital. And an ex-FIAMA worker said that he had raised concerns about this person in 2014. Now, I want us all to think about our own organizations today. Someone comes to you and says, I have concerns about someone. He's been threatening or she has been violent. Mark, when we hear that, what's the first thing we should do in that type of situation?
Well, again, you start the process associated with, doing an assessment on somebody and taking in pieces of data, whether it's, criminal record, whether it's your conversations, whether it's, changes in mood, whether it's things that have occurred in their personal life where they've suffered a separation or a divorce or a breakup or a loss. And so just assessing all those pieces of data and beginning the process of saying, hey, these are some of the behaviors of concern, and making a determination with engaging with other professionals in your own processes to say, hey, when do we have to have some level of intervention involved with that collection of that information regarding those behaviors of concern.
That's great insight. And I think, the next thing I'd like to point out in this image alone, it may not be your workplace. It may be, you may be in the building next to the FIAMA warehouse, and it may spill over into your workplace. So we have reasons to be aware, and we have actions that we need to take when it's internal to our own organization. This is a quote directly from the person who reported in 2014 that there was a problem. There is no doubt in my mind that I would have been a victim. I even broke down crying because there was something about this guy that struck me as, be careful with this person. Carlos Rodriguez said he learned that the shooter was capable of a workplace violence act in 2014 when he was the victim of a physical attack. To go on, Carlos, now we don't know all the details of exactly what happened. We have a side of a story. But Carlos Rodriguez says he was actually fired after reporting that he had a problem with this employee after he had an altercation with Newman. According to the Orange County Sheriff's Office report, Newman attacked Rodriguez, hitting him on the back of the head and knocking him to the ground. Newman then punched him several times and also tried to choke him with the strap of his book bag. Rodriguez said he then told his boss about the attack the next day. I reported to Bob that this guy ambushed me that day before, and I was going to pursue it legally. I was upset, as any of us would be. Bob was trying to calm me down. He's saying, listen, take a couple of days off. And then on Friday, Bob called me over the phone and said, listen, we made a decision. We're letting you go. Mark, what comments do you have on this scenario as it's unfolding?
Again, it is the collection of data. It's a change in this person's life. It's the communications, and then having that information gathered and collated, if you will, and having a program that says, hey, be able to report it, whether it's directly or whether it's anonymously, so we can start to build, for a lack of a better term, kind of a profile about these behaviors of concern to get to the point where, again, we're going to intercede prior to an incident occurring, prior to the act of violence. So that's, the focus of Firestorm, the focus on agencies like the Secret Service and law enforcement. If we can prevent these things, and the way we prevent them is gather that bits of information. These things typically just don't have some type of, they're not events that just occur out of the blue. People just don't snap. Typically what we've seen on people who want to harm our protectees or people who commit one of these acts of an active shooter or workplace violence is they walk a path. And they give off signals, and they communicate. And sometimes, what we see in this case is there are people who are concerned. So what are we doing with that information? Where are we taking that information? How is it then assessed? And then when do we feel comfortable that as this information has risen to a level where, again, we're going to interject some type of, we're going to intervene, whether it's involving law enforcement, whether it's involving HR folks, whether it's involving mental health professionals into the process, so we don't let it get to the level where the actual act of violence occurs.
Mark, did it surprise you in this situation that the company, in their minds, did take care of the situation by getting rid of one of the employees the ultimate shooter had a conflict with?
Well, again, you're removing them from the physical situation on a daily basis, but what we have seen is that that's not going to obviously prevent them from coming back to the facility. We haven't done an assessment. Have we made them aware of law enforcement? Have we got some type of restraining order? And we see that in domestic cases all the time. So just because they've been removed from the physical location doesn't mean that that's sufficient enough. In again, not knowing all the specific details of this, is understanding all those bits of data will then make, and assessing that information will then kind of guide you as to what are the steps you need to take in order to protect yourself from this potential occurrence of violence.
So, Mark, in this situation, it was actually the reverse. That was what got me, was that they did not release the ultimate shooter. They released the person who had the complaint. And that was what was shocking to me. In 2014, when Mr. Rodriguez said he had been attacked, he was the one who was terminated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, many years ago, I worked in an organization, and we had an employee who had behavioral issues and ultimately was terminated. We had someone else in the organization who I reported to at the time, and she was not happy about this person being terminated. And throughout the year, there was, for some reason, there was a celebration we were having. There was some kind of a party. We were having champagne, and there were about 50 people coming to the event. And when I looked up and saw the terminated person coming toward me really aggressively. She had a problem with my assistant at the time, and that was why ultimately she was terminated. And so she blamed me, and she blamed my assistant for her termination. Well, I was shocked to see her walking through the building on her way into our gathering. And I was very frightened because some of her behavior had been exceptionally aggressive. She pushed past me physically and went straight for my assistant and actually held her up against the wall by her throat. My first thought was flee. I'm a coward. I fled. And I went and I got help, and eventually for the next 3 days we had a police presence in the building because of how threatening the person had been. But the reason I bring this up is because the reason this woman had returned to the workplace is because the former manager, who felt bad that she had been released, invited her. So when you think to yourselves, folks on the call, that nobody would do something like that in our organization, or no, we know how to handle these things, I have to tell you, under stress, or there are just situations where people don't always make the best decisions, and those decisions can result in very serious repercussions. So I really want you to think about how well trained are your people. If they were put in the same situation, would they be able to make the right decision that they've been trained to? Are they practiced? Mr. Rodriguez says, I tried to warn them. I really wanted, if I tried to warn them I really wanted to get rid of him. If it had been up to me, he'd have been gone a long time ago. I feel sad about it, really. My condolences go out to the families and all of the ones that were affected. But I just wish they would have listened to my concerns. And that is why we named this webinar that, because we really want to make sure that you are paying attention to the warning signs so that you don't see this kind of a scene outside of your building. You know, later the company put a message on their website, said they were heartbroken following the unspeakable attack upon loved ones and employees. And they were asking for all the victims of the tragedy and their family for our thoughts and our prayers. I have to say, they certainly have our expressions of sympathy, but we really wish and hope in the future they'll be able to predict and be prepared for what could occur. So, Mark, we have a picture of a fire alarm here. Why are we looking at that?
Thanks, Karen. We're looking at that in all the schools that we visit, whether it's colleges, universities, K through 12, even down to child care centers. When we do the training, without fail, in every room that we've done it, regardless of where we're at, there are multiple things in that room associated with fire detection or suppression or notification. And when I ask the participants, you know, do you do fire drills? Do you do them with the students? Everybody nods their heads. And when I ask them, you know, to finish off this phrase, and I'll say stop, drop, and almost 99% of the people will then automatically follow up and say roll. And then I'll ask a question, hey, when do you think the last time in a traditional academic environment, educational environment, not a home school, not a home child care center, not a dorm room, but in a traditional school environment, when was the last time that a child perished as a result of a fire in the United States of America? And many of the participants are surprised to hear that it's been over 65 years. And when we think about all the work that we have done as far as putting resources into our facilities for the notification and the suppression, having great plans as far as evacuations are concerned, and also doing the training, we've really mitigated or almost neutralized the threat of fires in schools. When I ask those participants the same question, when do you think the last time a student died in an educational environment as a result of gunfire? Normally I will say, oh, last week or a month or, you know, a couple months ago, and that would be correct. And then I say go back those same 65 years and think about the numbers of students and teachers and administrators that have perished as a result of gunfire in those environments. And the numbers are staggering. And think about ones we all know about, Sandy Hook or Columbine or Virginia Tech or the community college in Oregon a couple years ago where 10 people lost their lives. And ask them, hey, are we doing the same types of things in our environments to protect ourselves and the students from this real and serious threat of an active shooter that has taken, obviously, a lot more lives in the recent years than fire has? And oftentimes the answer is no. And so that's why we have that up there, to get people to start thinking in similar terms that, hey, this is a very real threat that's having a cost in school environments. And we need to have a similar approach to this type of threat as we have had to fires in our schools.
And so when we look at barriers to preparedness, you know, Jim always says that the money and the safety of students should never be used in the same sentence, and that's why we remove it by giving people for a limited period our BRFA license for the first year at no fee, because we don't want that to be a barrier to preparedness. But you have some other barriers to preparedness listed here.
Certainly, you know, cost is a certain one. You know, we are all restricted by our budgetary resources, and people are concerned about, you know, what would it cost to bring in experts into the school and tell us what we need, and then, hey, what are those, you know, do we have the money for the physical or technical design features or for the equipment or for the training? So there's a concern, and obviously life's a lot about competing values. So cost is one. Inconvenience is a big one. You know, we don't want to disrupt our freedom. We don't want to disrupt our access. The cartoon that's on your screen there is talking about the inconvenience we all experience when we do commercial air travel by commercial airlines, these days. So inconvenience is a big one. Anybody who's ever been locked out of their house or their car or forgotten their ATM pin or their computer password. Its security is important. It protects us, but it can be overly inconvenient. People don't want to experience that, so they won't do the things necessary in order to properly protect themselves. Aesthetics, the different features of security may change the environment that we're in. We work in a lot of schools and child care centers and medical facilities, and the aesthetics of those environments are really important. I'm sure it's important at the University of Alabama how your facilities look and how the campus looks. So putting in those things that change the aesthetics of the environment, the feel, the nature of it can be a barrier, people not wanting to do those things. And finally, probably the biggest barrier is belief. They don't have a belief that this can happen to them. And if you don't believe that it's going to happen to you, you will not do the things necessary to prepare to efficiently respond to those different types of threats or critical incidents.
Mark, when I first started with Firestorm, I asked Jim who our biggest competitor was, and he said denial. So I really hear you when you say belief. So why am I looking at the bomb? When do we want preparation?
Well, obviously the pendulum will shift when we actually feel threatened. The security measures at the airports, if that occurred on September 10th, 2001, all of a sudden TSA existed and we had to take off our shoes and pull our laptops off and take our belts, I don't think the country would have responded the way they responded after September 11th. What changed? The threat that we felt as a nation is in relationship to air travel. So when we feel threatened, when we think that belief kicks in, then we will actually start to do the things necessary to put in a robust and effective and sustainable security program and security measures and policy and procedures.
And so, I mean, if I don't have a huge budget, if I have, no matter the size of my company, I mean, how do I keep from panicking people? What is the right balance to create a safe environment where everybody feels trained and comfortable in our approach?
I think, finding the balance, finding those sweet spots are critical for the sustainability of a security program or security measures or policy and procedures. We may put up for things for a certain period of time because we feel threatened, but when that threat dissipates, as it did after 9/11, people started to complain a lot more about the security measures they had to experience and the long lines, etc. Then if it's too burdensome, if it costs too much, if it changes the aesthetics too much, then it's not going to be sustainable. So finding that sweet spot of, having it be cost effective, having it be appropriate at the right scale, and having the appropriate belief where we're not overly concerned or we're paranoid or we're living in fear. We still need to live our lives the appropriate thing. So when we make recommendations to our clients, we take that into account. If all of a sudden getting into your computer, getting into your facility is taking way too long or it's way too inconvenient, then people are going to do the things to bypass those security measures and those policy and procedures, so it won't be sustainable.
Boy, they sure will. They'll just abandon it. We had a situation where we had an organization that had a lot of visitors onto their facility. They were business, but they were a huge campus. And one of the most locked down places in the world when it comes to deliveries might be, you could use Disney World as an example. They're really great about how they manage that security. But when you have tons of facilities on your property that receive truckloads or deliveries, or you have salespeople, or you have other guests on your property, it's really hard to strike that balance in a good way without inconveniencing everyone. I know we've had a client with that situation, and it was great to be able to watch how we were able to craft something that worked for them in an appropriate manner. Can you talk to me a little bit about your process? Your team has so much experience in this area that I think the folks on this call, no matter, again, the size of your business or your organization, are really going to benefit from hearing you talk about what's involved in a site assessment, the preparedness plan, and then the response training.
Yeah, we think it's a good security program. It's kind of like three legs of a stool. The site assessment is an important leg. And what that is taking a really granular look at the environment you're concerned about. Looking at what's around it, looking at the design features, looking at both the exterior and exterior design features, looking at any security features that you've integrated into the design features, the supporting policy and procedures. What are the operating procedures associated with that environment, and do they support the security, or do they detract from the security? Looking at issues associated with equipment and training. You really have to know your environment before you give. We really are not big believers on taking a cookie cutter approach. We're telling you to respond in a certain way that your environment doesn't support. Think about the UCLA event a couple springs ago, where they had a murder-suicide on campus, and the students were, given the command to lock down, but the facilities or the rooms, the classrooms, didn't have locks on the doors. And I don't think there were a lot of people that had an awareness of that prior to that event taking place, and the students had to kind of jury-rig barricades using, a lot of ingenuity, which took a lot of time in order to overcome that design issue associated with it. So understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of your facility is really important. Having then an emergency plan, having the plans that support that, so identifying the different types of emergencies you may experience, understanding kind of the roles and responsibilities everyone would have. Administrators are going to we're going to have a different responsibility than, say, the students are going to have in a variety of different emergencies. And then what resources do we need to make sure that when these, whether it's communication device, whether it's emergency supplies, whether it's food, notification, alert mechanisms, things like that, what are the supplies we need for a variety to sustain ourselves in relationship to a variety of different emergencies. And finally, then training. We then have to train. The first time we experience something or try to exercise our emergency protocols shouldn't be during an actual emergency itself. We always say at SEC, people don't rise to the occasion, they sink to the level of their training. So you have to have that response training that backs up the design features as well as the good, solid policy and procedures.
Well, those are really great insights, and I love that line that people don't rise to their training. That's a really important idea. I did want to ask you a question, too. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, so I think I can slip a question in. In many of the sad incidences I've seen, especially on college campuses, we see two things. We see media reaching out to people who are in sheltering in place or locked down, and there's still an active deadly weapon somewhere roaming around campus or a building. So I'd like to talk a little bit about how we train our employees that just because CNN or Fox News is reaching out to you does not mean you have to respond, because we've seen in other situations where a major publication published a tweet map of people who were in lockdown tweeting from those lockdown positions, which for me put them gravely at risk if the person or persons who were actively looking for victims had them pinpointed. Can you talk a little bit to the additional risk that's been added by social conversation?
Yeah, I think it's about awareness, and you see it in law enforcement situations all the time. The media and social media can be great as far as making notifications and giving advice and guidance and giving direction, but as you said, it can also be detrimental in giving away your location. And in an active shooter situation, And we'll talk a little bit later about what are the three choices we think you can make in relationship to an active shooter situation. But those types of communications, you often hear guidance associated is silencing your cell phone and pulling drapes and kind of concealing yourself with either cover or concealment, getting behind a locked or barricaded door. So those are the types of things. Again, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about them in a slide coming up. But yeah, that is a concern. Something needs to be taken into account.
Nowhere on this slide do I see the word tweet. So it doesn't say evacuate, secure, confront, tweet. So I really would love for people to understand that, because you can put yourself and others in danger. And there was a real trend there for a while called lockdown selfies, where groups of people who would be in lockdown with the lights down low were taking selfies. Their flashes were going off, which you could see from outside windows. Very frightening. So let's talk about the appropriate response, not tweeting about it, but rather.
We think there are really only three things you can do in an active shooter situation. And when we talk about an active shooter situation, we're saying that this is in relatively close proximity to you. And so we think you can either evacuate, you can secure, or you can confront. And obviously that's the one we hate the most. It's the one, it should be the last resort. We don't want to seek confrontation, obviously, in an active shooter situation, unless you have a protective responsibility, like campus police, for example. But you evacuate, obviously, to get away from the problem. Can I get, if this is in close proximity to me, can I get away from the problem? Can I get as far away from the problem as I possibly can? We hear, the terminology a lot, common terminology, run, hide, or fight. And we think these terms are a little bit more specific and a little bit more forceful. Run where? We're actually saying run away, evacuate, escape, get away from the problem, get away, get to a safer environment, get under the care and custody of security or law enforcement officials. That's number one. Secure yourself. Hey, if you don't have the opportunity to get away, or trying to leave the space you're in may take you towards the problem, take you towards the attacker, maybe the best option for you is to secure yourself. And that's getting behind either a locked or barricaded door that doesn't have a lot of vulnerabilities, like vulnerable glass, getting low, silencing the cell phones, closing blinds and drapes if you have the time and composure to think about that, getting in the space in the room that gets you out of the vantage point of any, doorway, windows that an attacker may be able to view you. So securing yourself in that space that will protect you from the attacker. And finally, confront. Again, this is the one, it's our last option. If you have no other option, there's nothing between you and the attacker, then you may be, if he's penetrated into the space that you're in, or you just didn't have any time or any warning, finding things, attacking, and hopefully, ideally, attacking in pairs, thinking about the things in your space, in your classrooms, in your offices, on your campus that you can use as a weapon, working together, throwing things at the attacker, and doing it with confidence and conviction and effort until the attacker or attackers are incapacitated, which has occurred on in a number of occasions. So thinking about having that mindset that I don't have another choice in the matter, and this is what's necessary. And finally, you'll see this confront. You'll see the alert button on the side. The most important thing we can do in one of these situations is to make sure that everybody who could be impacted of it is aware of it, to give the time in order to respond as effectively and as safely as possible.
Mark, I've heard you do this presentation now 3 times, and I've learned something new from each time you've spoken. I really love your practical approach to it. And the idea of giving people more clarity around evacuate, secure, and confront, makes very strong practical sense to me. You're right. When we tell people to evacuate, where, how, to whom, do we all go to the same place? And you and I both know that that creates a secondary target. So I really love the practical approach you've taken to making this simple and clean. I also want to let everyone on the call know, because of the participation of the University of Alabama, Firestorm has been working with the university to create a behavioral risk threat assessment process, and we call it BERTHA. And this empowers you to identify, assess, manage, and monitor employees or students or others that may be exhibiting behaviors of concern, and then gives you a practical template in order to document in a central location and intervene before a tragic situation can evolve and happen. Because we're through the auspice of the University of Alabama, if you reach out to us, you can reach out to webinars@firestorm.com. We can talk to you about implementing a license prior to the end of September. You have a little less than 60 days, and there will be no license fee for the first year. So if that's something you'd like to explore, you can send an email to webinars@firestorm.com or to me directly. If you're interested in learning more about a physical site assessment, you'd like to contact Mark, we'll make sure we can make that happen for you. Again, same email. And very shortly, we're going to have a paper up on the website which will have this and other information. And it will be a brief of today's session with slides, Mark's pretty picture and his contact information, and some other information that you can share internally within your organization. You can also go again to our YouTube channel, our University of Alabama playlist, and watch and reshare a recording of this session with those in your department, in your organization. Once again, our thanks to the University of Alabama College of Continuing Studies, Brenda Trulove and Derek Flowers, our contacts there for the Six Sigma program. And Mark, I really appreciate your comments and your input today. Do you have any closing items that you'd like to, any tidbits that you'd like to give to our audience before we give them back their day?
I think very simply, just to kind of recap, first of all, I want to thank you for your interest in the topic, but understanding your environments, having good plans, and then doing the things kind of to train to test those plans. You want to give yourselves a script to follow. You don't want to then, if you haven't given your script and this actually occurs, you're going to just rely on your kind of prehistorically hardwired instincts or of fight or flight or freeze. And giving yourself that script, practicing, looking what works, what the strengths and weaknesses of your facility, what your responses, how successful they were, are going to go a long way in making sure that you can respond as efficiently, effectively, and safely. God forbid one of these active shooter incidents ever arises at your campus.
Well, that's been great advice, Mark. Thank you. I think that really goes toward our goal everybody has of keeping our people and our property safe. And we want to make sure that we give all of our employees, our guests, our visitors, even our families, the tools that they need in order to get through a situation as quickly as possible and mitigate that crisis. So thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Bill Baker, in the background, for recording this session for us and for fielding any questions. And thank you, everyone who has attended today. We look forward to talking to you next month when our topic is going to be on leadership. And with that, I will close this webinar and give everyone back their day. Thank you, and have a great day.